Now, the Ukrainian president is asking for a meeting with Donald Trump, hopefully before the end of this weekend. But as we came on air this evening, we did see a message from the U.S. president. He says he is willing to meet with both Zelensky and Putin, but only as discussions are in their final stages, which obviously at this point they are not. We continue to track the story. But to talk about all of this, we're now reaching out to Jeremy Kinsman from 1992 to 1996. He served as Canada's ambassador to Russia. Mr. Kinsman, always good to see you. Thank you for the time this evening.
Well, thank you.
Listen, the White House press secretary did issue a statement today acknowledging that there are still details to be sorted out between the two sides. But Carolyn Levitt says those differences are not insurmountable. I'm wondering if you share that assessment, because there still are wide gulfs between what Russia and Ukraine wants when it comes to territory, NATO, and the future of Ukraine's military.
Yeah, well, I guess we shouldn't take our cue from Carolyn Levitt on issues like this. It clearly is very wide of the mark. This has been a most abnormal experience, Michael. It's a complete departure, not just from process, but in judgment, in substance, and in its effect on the United States allies, habitual allies, including, of course, Ukraine, as to just what the hell is going on in that country, how they could get something so important so very wrong.
So very wrong, as you say, and to remind people, it is talking about limiting Ukraine's ability to defend itself down the road. It stops it from having NATO ambitions if they were to accept what was presented by the U.S. president. And from Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, he said that any counterproposal would need to reflect the text and the spirit of the earlier agreement. So how much of a corner does that put Ukraine into?
Well, I don't think it puts Ukraine necessarily into the corner. What it does, it makes, I think, a ceasefire at this time pretty nigh impossible. The United States wants to get that ceasefire, just like in Gaza, as if getting the ceasefire is the whole deal, you know. The ceasefire is a ceasefire. It's to stop the killing. But a ceasefire interferes with Russia's original aims for the whole illegal criminal project of invading Ukraine. They want to control, they want to subjugate Ukraine. And they think right now their advantage in population and to some extent in geography is on their side. You know, since this war began 3.5 years ago, the Russians have only enlarged the territory they control by 1%. But at the same time, they've suffered probably about a million casualties and fatalities in the effort. I mean, it's absolutely appalling. And yet Putin is determined to go on. And he thinks that ultimately, because right now, in the critical northeast of Ukraine, in Donetsk province, the Russians are putting on an 8-to-1 superiority in personnel. And the Ukrainians just frankly can't keep up forever and ever. But they're not going to give up, and they're not going to surrender. And this preposterous 28-point document, which is a series of Russian talking points, basically is a demand for their surrender. And it cannot be. And for once, the allies of the United States, I think particularly of those who were at the G20 meeting this weekend in South Africa, issued a statement saying that it would not be. And it was the first time they've actually, in a way, though they coded this with a sort of semi-lavish gratitude or acknowledgement for what Donald Trump has managed to prompt in creating this process of talks, they deferred to him on that. They did state very clearly that this is an exercise in American leadership that will not, in substance, work. Though they were careful.
Will not in substance work. But, you know, I want to jump in here because we did hear from Zelensky over the weekend, and the Ukrainian president described this initial peace plan as a choice between losing Ukraine's dignity or losing Ukraine's closest ally. And by that, he means the United States. Can Ukraine continue this fight with Russia without the United States?
Well, it's a very big question, and the reason why Ukraine on one hand and the Europeans on the other hand want to avoid what will I say, provoking Trump's ego with any confrontational language, precisely because the United States is the only possible instrument, I think, to be able to exercise leverage on Russia, which they really haven't done. And with respect to Europe, of course, they want to see that leverage exercised on behalf of Ukrainian sovereignty and freedom, but also they want to keep the United States into the game of European security, which they consider, and particularly those on the eastern northern side of Europe, they believe it is distinctly menaced by this aggressive behavior on the part of a very hostile Russia.
Well, and hostile Russia, as you say. So talk to us then about the wider danger for Europe and really for any other democracy around this globe. If Ukraine, under pressure from the United States, accepted essentially the surrender of territory and limitations on military and NATO, what precedent does that set? What danger does that set for the rest of the world?
It's absolutely critical, Michael. The most, after the horrid, catastrophic Second World War, they killed 65 million people. The victors, I guess, and even the defeated countries concluded that this could never happen again. And the basic norm that had to, at all costs, be preserved was the interdiction against a country invading and using force to conquer a neighbor. And that hasn't happened, really, certainly on the European continent since the war, until this. And if Ukraine is forced into subjugation with restrictions on its independence that were explicit in this 28-point plan, which is now thankfully discarded, it would totally destroy the credibility, the viability of that norm, and we'd be in a nowhere land now of the big eat the small, and it will be a retreat back to the worst part of the 19th century.
Which is why we are watching this also very closely. Jeremy Kinsman, this process not yet over, but for this point, at this point rather, thank you for the time. We'll reach out again in future.
You bet.